Verbal abuse, physical abuse, trespassing and fires. This is the description given by the Gardaí in relation to the protests last night in Newtownmountkennedy in County Wicklow. As you'll have heard this morning, 6 arrests have been made in relation to this. And John Mooney, crime and security correspondent for the Sunday Times, was there last night and he joins me now. John, good morning.
Good morning, Pat.
Now, it's not that this erupted last night because there has been protest at Trotter House since it was earmarked as accommodation.
Well, this is a protest that's been going on for quite some time, and in many ways it's become an example of a much wider problem that's now going on or continuing across the country. So you have groups of local people become concerned about the opening of an accommodation or reception centre for people seeking international protection, and that becomes the focus of protests. And I suppose in many ways it acts as a point of cohesion for people that are of a certain mindset where they hold vigils, get to know one another quite well. And then you get this outside influence coming into it as well. So this has been going on up there for some time. Yet yesterday evening, it descended into complete and utter violence. Now, I wasn't there for much of the riot. I got there afterwards after much of it kicked off. But certainly what happened was that there was an attempt to start a bonfire close to a small building outside Trotter House. The violence escalated, whereby the Gardaí were quite clearly attacked and there was masonry, etc., thrown at them. And then in response to that, a public order unit, in trying to, regain control of the situation, ended up pursuing many of these rioters into local housing estates in that area. So as darkness fell, there was an awful sense of intimidation in the area. I have to say, I don't think the Gardaí did anything wrong. Having watched what happened on social media, but also being up there, they seemed pretty restrained to me. They were trying to, I think, ensure that those involved in the violence didn't actually physically start attacking property in those housing estates. And I think there was a concern that might happen because of the past events that we've seen in Dublin City and elsewhere.
What was Trotter House before it was earmarked for this task?
Well, it was actually, I understand, used as a wedding venue at one stage. And then I think in decades gone by, it had been used as accommodation for young disadvantaged people. But there, you have to put everything in context of what's happening up there, Pat. There are large housing estates being built in the vicinity of Trotter House. So it's not a location that's off in the countryside on its own. It's actually quite close to Newtownmountkennedy as you walk. And there's all sorts of social issues going on up there, whereby people can't get their kids into local schools because they're at capacity. There's also transport issues, etc. So that community is dealing with all the social issues that are affecting other parts of the country. And of course, when they hear that there's a large number of people coming in to be accommodated in tents around this facility, that has sparked off much of this riots. But of course, it's really important to remember that the anti-immigrant sentiments that are being expressed there are just one of various issues that people are getting radicalized by. So when people describe these groups as far right, I think that's a very simplistic view of what's happening. It's easy to kind of say that, but it's a much more complicated and deep-rooted problem.
Now, the question of whether or not there were outsiders, coming in to foment trouble is a question that's frequently asked. Now, many of the people, by the way, who are now living in Newtownmountkennedy have passed through it many times in the last year, and there are so many new housing estates being built. It all seems a bit higgledy-piggledy to me, I have to say. But anyway, they are being built. So many of the people who are living in these new housing estates are not Wicklow people necessarily. They're coming from all over, wherever they can find a house to live in, close to the capital. So what is the story about outsiders coming in to foment trouble versus people who are living locally who are involved in this trouble?
I think as a journalist who documents this type of activity, and someone who I suppose has a certain understanding of violent groups and the way they emerge, I think we really need to be careful about this. I'm a little bit hesitant to say all of this trouble is being started by people who arrive into an area, cause trouble and leave immediately, because I don't think that's the case. There were quite large numbers of people there. They're both men and women, and they're coming from all different social classes. I think it's really oversimplifying this problem to suggest that it's just a couple of rabble-rousers that arrive into areas and cause trouble and manage to evade capture afterwards. I think there are people from all walks of life involved in this. And whilst it's not a kind of centrally organized movement, as in this anti-immigration or anti-government movement, it's very fluid but people are getting involved in it from all different types of backgrounds. And certainly the people that I were talking to up there last night, they were local people, and some of them indeed told me they were born and bred in the town, and they had family members that were involved in that riot and had fled back into their homes afterwards. So I think we all have to be accurate about this.
Yeah.
I think people
and
need
also,
to...
Yeah, but the question is, John, sometimes things happen using crowd as a cover. There might be a few troublemakers who are prepared to take on the Gardaí, probably disguising themselves, smashing the windscreens of Garda cars, and they know they can probably do it with impunity because they have the cover of the crowd. And then there would be others in the crowd who say, I don't want to be part of this. This is not why I'm here at Trotterhouse. I want to make my views known to the government and the local representatives, but I certainly don't want to be attacking on Garda Síochána.
I think that's true, but I do think there are local people get involved in this type of activity as well. If you look at the arson attacks that have happened across the country in the past year, many of those, they're not being organised by people that come into areas. They're being organised by people that are from those areas because they know the ground, they know the geography, and indeed they know the movements of local Gardaí because they've been living in those communities
John,
all their lives.
Is it grist to the mill of these far-right elements that the Gardaí suddenly get tough on protest because they found it unacceptable that fires should be lit and that they themselves should be subject to intimidation and assault? Does it suit the far right?
Well, I think
then
that
there's
is
conflict
correct. I think many of these groups, they have a particular modus operandi, and I'm not even sure it's something that they're conscious of. They simply exist and spread and grow and evolve by managing to continue to organise these protests, which inevitably turn violent because the protests have a defined outcome, is that they want to stop the construction of these reception centres. And when the reception centres proceeds, there is only one outcome from them. They're losing that battle. So it inevitably results in violence.
All right, John. Well, we invited a number of public representatives on the show this morning, Wicklow TDs, senators and councillors, the majority of whom were not available. Many told us that we're not going to comment publicly on all of this. And one councillor said he'd be afraid to rile up those in his area. So, you wonder whether they're afraid to condemn what happened to the Gardaí, or lest they lose votes in the local elections, or what their motivation is, but they're staying by and large stum.
Well, I think the real issue with these groups is that they are operating outside what we would describe as normal political discourse, insofar as that you can have an argument with someone, respect the other side's view, and move on, and whoever wins that debate wins. With this, it's different. You're having a debate, obviously, going on. Some of it's on social media, some of it's in person to person, but you also have these other activities which are outside what normal people would consider proper political discourse, insofar as that if people's homes being targeted, anyone who's involved in any of these reception centres or leasing properties to the state, they are also being targeted. Indeed, I've dealt with people whose children have been targeted and followed, etc. So there is an air of menace around this. And dare I say it does remind me of sort of violent groups that have studied over the years that have been long in existence in this country. There's a certain similarities in their construct and their modus operandi, which to people like me, it's very, very familiar. But I have to say, this isn't going to go away. This is evolving. I think it's only a matter of time before these groups engage in more serious types of violence, because at the moment what they're doing is they engage in certain activities that's acceptable to their own supporters. So in other words, it's okay to throw rocks at police officers and damage Garda cars, but it's not okay at the moment maybe to throw a petrol bomb. But I think in time that violence will escalate and it will morph and develop and evolve. So what we're probably seeing at the moment is the start of a much more significant problem that is going to manifest itself in the coming years.
John Mooney, crime and security correspondent for the Sunday Times. Thank you very much.